Dear delegates, if you could take your seats so we can start this first session of Working Group 1. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call to order the first meeting of Working Group 1. I invite delegates to take their seats. Thank you very much. I would like to welcome you to the first meeting of the Working Group. It is a great privilege for me to chair this Working Group, and I am honoured to have been entrusted with this very significant responsibility. The workload of this Working Group is indeed very heavy. I trust that with a good spirit of cooperation, we will be able to proceed through the agenda items that have been assigned to us in an efficient manner, and that when our work is done, we will be proud of what we have achieved. As the President emphasised this morning, COP-15 and the meetings of the parties to the protocols will be taking place concurrently. Working Group 1 serves the COP as well as the MOP, meeting of the parties of the Nagoya Protocol. The Working Group will address COP-15 agenda items 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15B and 16, as well as items 13 and 14 under the Nagoya Protocol meeting of the parties. All other items on the agendas of COP and Nagoya Protocol MOP and all items under the Cartagena Protocol MOP will be covered by Working Group 2. Upon concluding its work, Working Group 1 will deliver a set of draft decisions to the COP and to the Nagoya Protocol MOP. As New Zealand is not a party to the Nagoya Protocol, I will hand over my chairing duties to Marie Haraldstad of Norway when the Working Group reviews CRPs under the protocol. Given our extremely heavy agenda, time management will be very important. I propose that the limited negotiation time we have available to us should be used to address new or unresolved issues in draft decisions. These include bracketed text and issues that have not yet been addressed by parties at the intergovernmental level. I ask you to kindly avoid requesting the floor to make general statements including statements congratulating me or those that repeat points previously raised and discussed at a meeting of one of the subsidiary bodies, especially on those for which a comprehensive draft decision has already been prepared by those bodies. In order to use our limited time to discuss substantive matters, please do not request the floor for editorial or translation issues. Please include those comments in any written submissions. In accordance with the proposed organisation of work contained in document COP-15/1/add4/Rev1, for items with only a few unresolved issues, it is proposed to directly prepare conference room papers with informal consultations with relevant parties as necessary. For items with many or complex unresolved issues, indicated by square brackets, it is proposed to immediately establish a contact group with a view to preparing a consensus text that can be transmitted to the working group as a CRP. For most items, the contact group is expected to work on the basis of the draft decisions prepared by the subsidiary bodies. However, where necessary, the chair or co-chairs of the contact group, with the assistance of the Secretariat, may prepare a non-paper as the basis for discussions. The following principles apply to our contact groups. Contact group sessions will last for up to 3 hours. They can meet from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m, from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m, and from 7:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. No more than 2 contact groups from each working group will be held in parallel. However, no contact groups will be held in parallel to a plenary session. Contact groups are open to participation by all parties. Other governments and observers will also be able to participate unless otherwise decided by the chair or co-chairs. The usual practice and rules will apply to participation of observers. They may speak at the discretion of the chair or co-chairs and are given the floor only after parties speak. Any substantive proposal from an observer must be supported by at least one party. Delegates, it will be very important to keep a close watch on the monitors and online schedule in order to be present in the meeting room at relevant times, as we may move swiftly from one item to the next. We may take up items that are listed for the next day if we make good progress. Before we start considering our first item on the agenda, I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the compilations of draft decisions for the COP and MOP. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Document COP-15-2 is the compilation of draft decision for the consideration of COP-15. The compilation includes the draft decisions contained in the various recommendations prepared at the 23rd and 24th meeting of SUBSTA, the 3rd meeting of SBI, the 11th meeting of the ad hoc open-ended working group on Article 8J and related provisions, and the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th meeting of the working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Where appropriate, additional elements have been developed by the Executive Secretary in light of previous decisions of the COP or recommendation of its subsidiary bodies. These new elements are highlighted in light gray throughout the updated compilation. Document CBD-NP-MOP-04 1 add 5 contains the draft decision for consideration by COP-MOP-04 of the Nagoya Protocol. Under item 13, this note includes elements of a draft decision highlighted in gray, developed by the Executive Secretary in light of previous decisions from the meeting of the parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. I would now like to ask the Secretariat to provide some logistical information. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. This morning in plenary, you were briefed on COVID measures, the use of the cloakroom, headset, microphones, and the statement upload. Some of this content bears repeating. Upon entrance to this meeting hall, you have been provided a headset. Kindly be sure to return it on your way out after each meeting of the working group. Heads of delegation seated at the table do not need to take a headset at the entrance, as one is already waiting for you on the table. Kindly note that assigned seating is limited to 4 per delegation in this room. Any additional members of your delegation may wish to use the free seating at the back. Regarding the use of microphones, if you wish to speak, please press the button in front of you only once. The green light will turn on and will be notified of your request. Please note that pressing the button twice will cancel the request to speak. When it is your turn to speak, the chair will invite you to do so. The light will turn red, and the technician will turn on your microphone. With regard to statements made in this working group, delegates are requested to upload them in advance using the online application on the meeting page. This greatly facilitates the work of interpreters. Statement will be posted on the website after delivery if you agree to do this when uploading them. Statement must be uploaded within 1 hour after the end of the session in which the intervention was made. Please be sure to include the name of your country, organization, and the agenda item on the first page of the document that is uploaded. To upload a statement, please select the meeting from the conference page shown on the slide being displayed and click the Upload Statements tab. You will need to enter your priority passcode or badge number. It is also possible to upload your statements via the Schedule tab. You heard this morning that CBD meetings are paperless. I'd like to add that in a further effort to promote paperless meetings, the Secretary has developed a CBD events application that is available for download free of charge. The app can be downloaded at www.cbdint/cbd-events. Kindly note that all sessions of this working group will be available online in viewer mode. If you wish to follow remotely, you may log in with your username and password sent with your priority pass, accessing the meeting from the calendar tab at the top of the meeting page. Please note that session of the plenary and the working groups will also be broadcast live in YouTube, with access also from the calendar tab. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. We will begin with item 8 of the COP-15 agenda, review of progress in the implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020, and the achievement of the Aichi biodiversity targets. Under this item, we will consider 2 draft decisions on the scientific and technical evidence base for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and on the review of progress in the implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020. SBSTA, at its 23rd and 24th meetings, prepared recommendations 23/1 and 24/1, which contain draft decisions related to informing the scientific and technical evidence base for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework for consideration by COP. The two draft decisions were combined and the text reorganised to ensure a logical flow of the different paragraphs. The resulting draft decision is set out in the compilation of draft decisions. As the draft decision has been prepared by SBSTA, I do not plan to open the floor for further interventions at this point. I note that the decision is relatively short, with only a few outstanding issues. Therefore, I will undertake informal consultations on the remaining issues and prepare a conference room paper for review and approval by the working group on Friday. I see no objection to that course of action. Thank you very much. Let us now turn to the second decision under this item on review of progress in the implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020. SBI 3 considered an updated analysis of progress made in the implementation of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020, an analysis of the contribution of national targets established by parties, and progress towards the achievement of the Aichi biodiversity targets, as well as information on the implementation of Article 8J and related provisions, and of the Gender Plan of Action, and prepared Recommendation 3/1, including a draft decision on these matters for consideration by COP. In addition, the Secretariat has made a number of documents available. I will now ask the Secretariat to introduce the additional documentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. The subsidiary body on implementation took up the agenda item 3 on a review of progress towards implementation of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020 at the first plenary session of Part 1 of the meeting on the 16th of May 2021. In considering the item, the subsidiary body had before it a note by the Executive Secretary on the review of progress in implementation of the Convention and the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011-2020, CBD/SBI/3/2, including a suggested recommendation. It also had before it 4 addenda to that document, setting out an update on progress in revising and updating and implementing national biodiversity strategies and action plans, including national targets, CBD/SBI/3/2 add 1, an analysis of the contribution of targets established by parties and progress towards the Aichi biodiversity targets, CBD/SBI/3/2 add 2, a review of implementation of the 2015 to 2020 Gender Plan of Action, CBD/SBI/3/2 add 3, and finally a note on progress towards Aichi biodiversity target 18 on traditional knowledge and customary sustainable use of biodiversity, CBD/SBI/3/2 add 4. As 8 parties submitted national biodiversity strategies and action plans, and 29 parties submitted national reports in an official language of the United Nations between the production of CBD/SBI/3/2 in between 2020 and 2022, the Secretariat has updated CBD/SBI/3/2 and its Addendum 1 on progress in revising and updating and implementing national biodiversity strategies and action plans, including national targets, and its Addendum 2 on an analysis of the contribution of targets established by parties and progress towards the Aichi biodiversity targets. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Distinguished delegates, the draft decision has been discussed at SBI 3, so I have no plan to open the floor for further interventions at this point. I note that the decision has only a few outstanding issues. Therefore, I will undertake informal consultations on the remaining issues and prepare a conference room paper for review and approval by the working group on Friday. I see no objection. Thank you very much. We will now turn our attention to item 9, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This item is divided into 4 sub-items, which we will take up separately. We'll begin by considering COP Agenda Item 9A, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. I give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the documentation for this item.
Thank you, Chair. In Decision 1434, the Conference of the Parties adopted the preparatory process for the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and established an open-ended intersessional working group to support the preparation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and designated Mr. Francis Ogwal from Uganda and Mr. Basil Van Havre from Canada to serve as the co-chairs of the working group. 5 sessions of the working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework have been convened, with its 5th and final meeting taking place from 3 to 5 December here in Montreal. At its 5th meeting, the working group adopted Recommendation 5/1, containing a draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The Conference of the Parties is invited to consider this agenda item on the basis of the draft decision contained in this document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Under this item, the COP has before it the main body of the draft decision adopting the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, among other things, set out in Recommendation 4/1 of the open-ended working group on the Global Biodiversity Framework, and the draft post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which would be annexed to that decision, set out in Recommendation 5/1 of the working group, as presented by the co-chairs of the working group in plenary this morning. I will explain how I intend to proceed with the draft decision in a few minutes. With regard to the draft Global Biodiversity Framework, I understand that there is still a lot of work to be done. I therefore propose, in the interest of time, to refer further work on the framework directly to a contact group and not to open the floor for interventions at this point. The mandate of the contact group is to address all elements of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework with a view to its approval by the working group and adoption in plenary at the end of this meeting of the COP. The contact group will be chaired by Francis Ogwal, Uganda, and Basil Van Havre of Canada. Please check the monitors and online schedule for the meeting time and place. I asked the contact group to meet throughout this week and to report back to this working group on its progress on Friday. I see no objection to that course of action. Thank you very much. Distinguished delegates, under this agenda item, we will also be looking at a draft decision by which the final post-2020 global biodiversity framework would be adopted, among other things. We will come back to this draft decision at a session of our working group next Tuesday or Wednesday. In the meantime, I will undertake informal consultations on the most effective way forward. At that point, we will also consider how the meeting of the parties to the Nagoya Protocol will consider item 13 of its agenda concerning the Global Biodiversity Framework. For your information, the Cartagena meeting of the parties will address the framework in the context of its decision on the post-2020 implementation plan, which is being considered by Working Group 2. Let us now turn to agenda item 9B on the monitoring framework for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. I will give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the documents for this item.
Thank you, Chair. SAPSTA Recommendation 24.2 includes a draft approach to monitoring, including an assessment of headline indicators and proposals for additional indicators, as well as component and complementary indicators for monitoring the Global Biodiversity Framework. Further, SAPSTA requested the Executive Secretary to compile additional comments from parties and conduct a further scientific and technical review of the indicators, including through an expert workshop focused on the headline indicators for the monitoring framework. The workshop was held in Bonn in June 2020, and the report of the workshop is available as CBD/ID/OM/2022/1/2. The Conference of the Parties is invited to consider a draft decision on the monitoring framework based on SAPSTA Recommendation 24.2 and the outcomes of the above-mentioned review. Please note that the tables in the annex of the draft decision have been developed by the Executive Secretary to reflect the outcome of the technical review mandated in Recommendation 24.2. The new elements are highlighted in gray. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. Colleagues, as explained by the Secretariat, the draft decision on this agenda item comes from SAPSTA 24 and has been updated to take into account the intersessional work mandated by SAPSTA. I propose to ask the contact group that we just established on item 9A to consider the headline indicators while going through the respective goals and targets of the framework. I also propose to establish a group of friends of the Chair to look at the text of the draft decision on this item, which includes the establishment of the ad hoc technical expert group, and to resolve any outstanding issues in order for me to prepare a conference room paper for review and approval by the working group. The group of friends of the Chair will be led by Ezequiel Benitez from Mexico and will meet for the first time tomorrow morning, with the exact time to be determined later, depending on our progress in the working group. The Friends of the Chair group, led by Ezequiel Benitez, will continue to be available if needed to address any cross-cutting issues that may arise from the review of the indicators in the contact group on the Global Biodiversity Framework. Colleagues, we suggest that the following parties might be interested in participating in the Friends of the Chair group. But I would make the point that the group is open to any interested parties at all. So UK, Ghana, Canada, China, EU, South Africa, Brazil, and Argentina. But I stress, the Friends of the Chair group will be open to any interested parties who wish to participate. Thank you. So I see no objection to that course of action. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'll come to item 9C in a minute. I'll just consult with the Secretariat. Switzerland has asked for the floor. I give the floor to Switzerland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just very briefly, we would like also to join and support the Friends of the Chair group. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Switzerland. Yes. Yes, that is duly noted, and as I said, the group is open to anyone who's interested, and you don't need to take the floor to inform us, and please watch the monitors for information on the group. Thank you. So let us now move to sub-item 9C on communication. And let us take this item together with item 13C, also on communication. At its third meeting, SBI considered the issue of communications under two agenda items. First, it discussed the overall communications strategy and activities of the Secretariat on communications and approved SBI Recommendation 3/18, including a draft decision which is presented in the compilation of draft decisions under item 13C. Second, it discussed communications in support of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, with the result of its deliberations set out in SBI Recommendation 3/5, including a draft decision which is presented under COP Agenda Item 9C. As the draft decisions have been discussed by SBI, I do not intend to open the floor for further interventions at this point. I understand that there are still a number of outstanding issues, so I will undertake informal consultations and prepare a conference room paper for review and approval by the working group. I see no objection. Thank you very much. Our next item is 9D, Gender Plan of Action. At its third meeting, SBI considered a draft post-2020 Gender Plan of Action, which had been developed by the Secretariat during the intersessional period, and approved Recommendation 3/3, including a draft decision for consideration by the COP. Considering that the draft decision has been discussed by SBI, I do not see the need to open the floor for further interventions at this point. I believe there are only very few unresolved issues. In view of the limited time available to us in this session of the working group, I will undertake informal consultations and, with the help of the Secretariat, prepare a conference room paper for review and approval by the working group. I see no objection. Thank you very much. We will now turn our attention to item 10, enhancing integration with respect to provisions related to Article 8J and related provisions. Under item 10, we have 3 draft decisions to consider. Under sub-item 10A, a draft decision on the development of a new programme of work and institutional arrangements on Article 8J and related provisions. Under sub-item 10B, a draft decision on an in-depth dialogue on thematic areas and cross-cutting issues. And under sub-item 10C, a draft decision on recommendations from the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues to the CBD. We will address each sub-item separately. So let us start with sub-item 10A, on the development of a new programme of work and institutional arrangements on Article 8J and related provisions. The ad hoc open-ended working group on Article 8J and related provisions at its 11th meeting in November 2019 considered an item on Indigenous peoples and local communities and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, including possible elements of a future programme of work on Article 8J and related provisions, as well as possible institutional arrangements and their modus operandi, and prepared recommendation 11/2. The COP is invited to consider the draft decision on the matter included in that recommendation. You will notice that there are still a number of small brackets in the text. Small number of square brackets in the text. However, with regard to the brackets in Annex 2, please note that we do not need to resolve these brackets at this meeting, as the new programme of work on Article 8J will be further considered by the Working Group on Article 8J and related provisions at its 12th meeting. Considering that the draft decision has been discussed by the Working Group on Article 8J and related provisions, I do not plan to open the floor for further interventions at this point. I will undertake informal consultations on the outstanding issues and, with the help of the Secretariat, prepare a conference room paper for review and approval by the Working Group. I see no objection. Thank you very much. We now move to item 10B on an in-depth dialogue on thematic areas and cross-cutting issues. Further to COP decisions 10/43 and 14/14, the Working Group conducted an in-depth dialogue on the topic Contribution of Traditional Knowledge, Innovations and Practices of Indigenous Peoples and Local Communities and Cultural Diversity to the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and adopted Recommendation 11/1. The draft decision contained in that recommendation sets out a proposed topic for the in-depth dialogue on thematic areas and other cross-cutting issues to be held at the 12th meeting of the Working Group. Considering that this issue was thoroughly discussed by the Working Group on Article 8J, I do not plan to open the floor for further interventions at this point. As there are no brackets in the draft decision in front of us, I suggest that we convert the draft into a conference room paper for review and approval by the Working Group on Friday. I see no objection. Thank you very much. We will now move to sub-item 10C, recommendations from the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues to the CBD. The Working Group on Article 8J and related provisions at its 11th meeting in November 2019 considered the recommendations emanating from the 17th and 18th meetings of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and prepared Recommendation 11/4. The COP is invited to consider the draft decision prepared by the Working Group on this matter as part of the recommendation. Please note that the Secretariat will make available the recommendations from the 19th and 20th meetings of the Permanent Forum held in 2021 and 2022 to the next session of the Working Group on Article 8J. Considering that this issue was thoroughly discussed by the Working Group on Article 8J, I do not plan to open the floor for further interventions at this point. As there are no brackets in the draft decision in front of us, I suggest that we convert the draft into a conference room paper for review and approval by the Working Group on Friday. I see no objection. Thank you very much. Hello. Colleagues, we will now take up digital sequence information, which is item 11 on the COP agenda and item 14 on the agenda of the Nagoya Protocol meeting of the parties. Both bodies are invited to consider this item. I now invite the Secretariat to introduce the documentation for this item.
Thank you, Chair. In CBD COP Decision 14/20, the Conference of the Parties established a process to work towards resolving a divergence of views among parties regarding benefit sharing from the use of digital sequence information on genetic resources. This process included 4 studies and an ad hoc technical expert group. The outcome from this group was considered by the open-ended working group on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework with the goal of making a recommendation to the Conference of the Parties at its 15th meeting on how to address digital sequence information on genetic resources in the context of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. The working group produced recommendation 3/2 and 4/2 on DSI. Additionally, the co-chairs of the working group and the executive secretary of the convention established an informal process during the prolonged intersessional period and an informal advisory group on DSI to support the working group. The 5th and final meeting of the working group considered document CBD/working group 2020/5/3 and prepared recommendation 5/2. The Conference of the Parties may wish to consider this agenda item on the basis of this recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. As this item has been discussed in depth by the Working Group on the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, I do not plan to open the floor for further interventions at this time. Instead, in the interest of time, I propose to establish a contact group to address this issue. The mandate of the contact group is to finalise the draft decision. The contact group will be co-chaired by Gauta Voigt Hansen, Norway, and Letitia Wamulomoni, South Africa, and will meet tomorrow at 3 p.m. Please check the monitors for information on the room. After the contact group has concluded its work, this working group will come back to consider how the outcome of the work by the contact group and later by the COP may be addressed in the context of the meeting of the parties to the Nagoya Protocol. I see no objection. Thank you very much. Oh, apologies. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and this is not actually an objection. During the 5th meeting of the working group, Brazil has presented a non-paper on hybrid approaches, which has been included as Section E of the Annex of Recommendation 5/2. We'd like to announce that we have prepared a revised and shorter version of this non-paper, and we'll be submitting this in writing accordingly to be replaced within the Recommendation 5/2 for further consideration. This revised version does not represent a fundamental shift, it's only a cleaner and shorter version, so I believe parties are already familiar with the content from the open-ended working group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brazil. That's duly noted. We got RM and FM? Okay, good. Distinguished delegates, we will now take up COP-15 Agenda Item 12, which has two parts. We will begin with the item on resource mobilisation, Item 12A, and subsequently consider Item 12B on the financial mechanism. I now invite the Secretariat to introduce the documents for Agenda Item 12A. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. In Decision 14/22, the Conference of the Parties decided to initiate preparations for the resource mobilization component of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework at an early stage and in full coherence and coordination with the overall process for the framework. The Conference of the Parties requested the Executive Secretary to contract a panel of experts on resource mobilization to undertake a number of activities and prepare reports to contribute to the overall process. The third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation considered the documentation produced by the expert panel and prepared a draft decision contained in SBI Recommendation 3.6. SBI 3 also mandated an informal consultative process on resource mobilization. Information document 22 contains a report of the co-chairs of the SBI Contract Group on Resource Mobilization on this process, and it were these co-chairs that facilitated the informal consultative process. Under this item, the Conference of the Parties may wish to consider the mentioned documentation, in particular the draft decision contained in SBI Recommendation 3/6. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. I would like to remind you that this item was considered in depth by SBI 3. While SBI made great progress in the consideration of this item, a lot of work still remains to be done. In particular, the text on resource mobilisation that you have before you remains heavily bracketed. In the interests of time, I would therefore like to establish a contact group for this item. The contact group will be co-chaired by Ms. Ines Vallet from Belgium and Mr. Shonasani Munzesi from the Republic of South Africa. The mandate of the contact group is to consider and finalise the draft decision on resource mobilisation. The co-chairs will report back to us on their progress on Friday during the meeting of this working group. The group will meet tonight from 7:30 to 10:30 p.m. Please check the monitors to identify the room. I see no objection. Thank you very much. We will now turn our attention to Agenda Item 12B on the financial mechanism. Before we proceed, kindly recall that the third meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation in March 2022 submitted in Recommendation 3/7 a draft decision on the financial mechanism for consideration by the COP. However, the Cartagena Protocol and the Nagoya Protocol meetings of the parties will each address the financial mechanism and may provide further recommendations for consideration by the COP. I now invite the Secretariat to introduce the documents for this item.
Thank you, Chair. A draft decision on the financial mechanism is contained in a combination of draft decision document CBD/COP-15/2. The draft decision mainly reproduces the draft decision contained in SBI recommendation 3/7, but also includes elements set out in document CBD/COP/15/10. In line with the request from SBI, this document contains updated information on the report of the Global Environment Facility and updated previous consolidated guidance to the Global Environment Facility. In addition, the note highlights the need for the COP to initiate the preparation of a 4-year framework of outcome-oriented program priorities and the assessment of funding needs for the 9th replenishment of the Global Environment Facility, and to maintain efforts to enhance synergies among biodiversity-related conventions in this regard. To this end, the note provides additional elements of a draft decision. The Conference of the Parties is therefore invited to adopt a comprehensive decision related to the financial mechanism, including consolidated previous guidance to the financial mechanism. That's going to be 3rd edition, 2022. 4-year outcome-oriented framework of program priorities of the Convention on Biological Diversity for the 8th replenishment period, 2020 to 2026, 2022 to 2026 of the Global Environment Facility Trust Fund. Terms of references for the 6th review of the effectiveness of the financial mechanism. Terms of reference for a full assessment of the amount of funds needed for the implementation of the Convention and its protocols for the 9th replenishment period of the Global Environment Facility Trust Fund. Finally, Chair, I would like to draw attention to the report of the Council of the Global Environment Facility to COP-15, CBD/COP/15/8, and also to an information document submitted by the GEF Secretariat concerning GEF support to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, CBD/COP/15/Info/4. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I now invite the Secretariat of the Global Environment Facility to introduce the report of the GEF Council. I understand that the introduction will be made by Chizuru Aoki. Ms. Aoki, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're pleased to introduce the GEF report to COP15. This report covers the period from July 1, 2018 to December 31st, 2021, corresponding to 3.5 years of the GEF7 period, reflecting the extended period between COP14 and COP15 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me first report on the successful outcomes of the record replenishment of $5.33 billion for the GEF period of 1 July 2022 to 30th June of 2026. the biodiversity focal area received $1.92 billion, making it the single largest GEF focal area with 36% of the total GEF-8 replenishment amount. This amount reflects a 49% increase in funding allocated to biodiversity compared to the GEF-7 level of $1.292 billion. With the real markers applied, as much as 60% of the GEF programming will be on biodiversity. With this robust replenishment, the GEF stands ready to support the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The GEF-8 Biodiversity Focal Area Strategy, complemented by a set of 11 integrated programs, will provide a comprehensive response to the drivers of biodiversity loss. Now, regarding the GEF programming efficiency, a total of $1.29 billion was allocated to the biodiversity focal area in the GEF-7 period. The GEF partnership programmed $1.1 billion, or 85% of this total amount, allocated to the biodiversity focal area during the reporting period. These resources supported 100 biodiversity focal area projects and programs, and 146 multifocal area projects and programs, as well as 76 child projects. In total, 141 countries have benefited from these investments. By the end of the GEF-7 period, $1.25 billion, or 97% of the total biodiversity allocation in GEF-7 was successfully programmed. On resource mobilization, $1.63 billion from all of GEF resources was mobilized to achieve the Aichi biodiversity targets in the reporting period. This figure demonstrates GEF's ability to mobilize support beyond the biodiversity focal area, including the International Waters Focal Area, the Least Developed Countries Fund for Climate Change Adaptation, the non-grant instruments, among other areas. This amount mobilized $15.7 billion in co-financing, with one GEF dollar leveraging $9.6. The GEF has introduced a series of corporate targets on key expected outcomes, including for biodiversity. The GEF-7 portfolio is expected to have 1.7 billion hectares of landscapes and seascapes under improved management for biodiversity conservation, sustainable use, and ecosystem restoration. The portfolio performance is quite strong, with 86% of the biodiversity portfolio under implementation during the reporting period were rated in the satisfactory range in achieving implementation progress, and 87% were rated in the satisfactory range for the likelihood to achieve their development objectives. In summary, the GEF has demonstrated high programming efficiency and portfolio performance backed by its resource mobilization track record. We're ready to enhance support to parties in their efforts to implement biodiversity action on the ground. We would also like to thank the CBD Secretariat for close collaboration extended. In closing, please allow me to reaffirm that the GEF stands ready to support you and parties towards a successful landmark COP. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, GEF Secretariat. Distinguished delegates, I have looked carefully at the draft decision contained in the compilation. SBI spent considerable time and effort and succeeded in preparing a comprehensive recommendation. A few elements remain bracketed, however. New elements need to be added to initiate intersessional work to inform COP-16. And we expect also to incorporate additional elements emanating from the meetings of the parties to the protocols. Therefore, in the best interest of time, I would like to establish a contact group to consider the draft decision with a view to providing consolidated clean text that I can bring back to the working group in a conference room paper. The mandate for the contact group will be to consider and finalise the draft decision on the financial mechanism. In order to avoid overlap with the work of the contact group on resource mobilisation, and noting that additional guidance may arise from work under different items on the COP and MOP's agenda, This group will not meet until a later point during this meeting. The time and co-chairs will be announced in the coming days. I see no objection. Thank you very much. Dear delegates, we now move to agenda item 13. Under this agenda item, you have before you draft decisions on two sub-items. On sub-item 13A, a draft decision on capacity building and technical and scientific cooperation, and on sub-item 13B, a draft decision on knowledge management and the clearinghouse mechanism. Regarding sub-item 13C on communication, kindly recall that we took this item up earlier together with sub-item 9C. We will consider each of the two remaining sub-items separately. I invite the Secretariat now to introduce the documents for sub-item 13A on capacity building and technical and scientific cooperation. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, under sub-item 13A, you have before you a draft decision on capacity building and technical and scientific cooperation based on SBI recommendation 3/8, as well as additional elements prepared by the Executive Secretary based on the intersessional work, which are highlighted in gray. The draft decision includes subsection A on capacity building and subsection B on technical and scientific cooperation, as well as Annex 1, which contains a draft long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development to support implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Annex 2, which contains proposals to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation in support of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and Annex 3, which contains draft terms of reference of an informal advisory group on technical and scientific cooperation. In addition, you have before you document COP-15/12, providing a summary report of the review of technical and scientific cooperation programs under the Convention and its protocols, which was requested by SBI in its recommendation 3/8. The full report of the review is also available in information document 6, as shown on the screen in front of you. Finally, you also have before you information document 5, presenting the final report on the implementation of the short-term action plan 2017 to 2020 to enhance and support capacity building for the implementation of the convention and its protocols, as well as information document 8, presenting a progress report on technical and scientific cooperation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Distinguished delegates, quite a number of elements of the draft decision on capacity building and technical and scientific cooperation are still in square brackets. I therefore propose to establish a contact group to address this item with the mandate to finalise the draft decision, including its annexes, focusing on the bracketed text. The contact group will be chaired by Ms. Laura Bermudez of Colombia and Mr. Hayo Hanstra from the Netherlands, and it will meet on Thursday afternoon. Please refer to the schedule for the location. I see no objection. Thank you very much. Let us now move to sub-item 13B on knowledge management. SBI, at its third meeting, considered the item and prepared a draft decision on knowledge management and the clearinghouse mechanism, as set out in SBI Recommendation 3/10, including a knowledge management component of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework contained in its annex. Also before you, for your information, is a progress report on the implementation of the work programme for the clearinghouse mechanism contained in Information Document 9. Dear delegates, as you may recall, SBI 3 had very limited time to discuss this draft decision, and the knowledge management component of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework contained in the annex has not been considered. For this reason, it remains in brackets. I propose, therefore, that the group that we just established to address the decision on capacity building and technical and scientific cooperation will also address this item on knowledge management, focusing on determining a way forward once it has finished its work on capacity building. I see no objection. Thank you very much. Let us now turn our attention to Agenda Item 14 on mechanisms for planning, monitoring, reporting and review. I now invite the Secretariat to introduce the documents for this agenda item. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. SBI 3 considered a proposal for an enhanced review mechanism and prepared Recommendation 3/11, which included a draft decision for consideration by the COP. The SBI also requested the Executive Secretary to facilitate an extended peer review of the proposed annexes of the draft decision. The annexes provide draft guidance for national biodiversity strategies and action plans, including a template for national targets aligned with the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, templates for the 7th and 8th national reports, a modus operandi for an SBI open-ended forum for country-by-country review, and a template for voluntary commitments from non-state actors. Comments received on the draft annexes were further discussed at a workshop held on the margins of the 4th meeting of the Working Group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The report of the workshop is available as CBD/ID/WS/2022/1/3. SBI further recommended that the outcomes of its work and the extended peer review of the annexes be made available to the Working Group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The annexes on the NBSAP guidance and national reports have since been updated by the Executive Secretary to take into account the need to operationalize the collection of information in the clearinghouse mechanism and online reporting tool. The Conference of the Parties is invited to consider this agenda item on the basis of the draft decision contained in SBI Recommendation 3/11, also taking into account the relevant deliberations of the Working Group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as the further developed draft annexes. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. Colleagues, as explained by the Secretariat, the draft decision on this agenda has been prepared by SBI, while the annexes to the draft decision are the result of intercessional work requested by SBI. As there are still a number of outstanding issues, I would like to establish, in the interest of time, a contact group to consider the draft decision with a view to providing clean, consolidated text that I can bring back to the working group as a conference room paper. The contact group will be chaired by Ms. Gillian Guthrie from Jamaica and Mr. Andrew Stott from the United Kingdom. The group will meet tonight at 7:30. Please check the monitors for the location. see no objection. Thank you very much. We will now take up agenda item 15B on cooperation with other conventions and international organisations. I now invite the Secretariat to introduce the documents for this item.
Thank you, Chair. The draft decision on cooperation has been prepared by SBI as part of its recommendation 3/12. For the present meeting, the Executive Secretary has prepared a short note to bring to the attention of participants several information documents that contain submissions made by other international organizations, conventions, and initiatives, providing updates on relevant work of in the context of cooperation under the Convention. Please also note that the meetings of the parties to the protocols will be addressing items on cooperation under their respective agenda items.
Thank you, Secretariat. Distinguished delegates, SBI has prepared a comprehensive draft decision on this item. I note that the decision has only a few outstanding issues. Therefore, I will undertake informal consultations on the remaining issues and prepare a conference room paper for your review and approval. I do not therefore intend to invite interventions on the text of the draft decision. We have, however, heard from the Secretariat that several submissions have been published in information documents. We are also aware that governing bodies of several other conventions and organisations have recently met and addressed matters relevant to their cooperation with the Convention and to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Therefore, I would like to invite very short briefings of no more than 2 minutes from a number of these conventions and organisations, and request that your full statements be uploaded to the website. I see no objection to this course of action. Thank you very much. With this, I now invite the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture for a short briefing. International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, you have the floor.
Thank you for the opportunity of providing this update. A summary of major outcomes from the 9th session of the governing body held in September in New Delhi, India, has been provided in Information Document 15. Several resolutions made direct reference to various aspects of negotiations of the Global Biodiversity Framework and considerations related to digital sequence information. At its 10th session in November 2023, the governing body intends to consider the post-2020 framework and consider follow-up actions to support its implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that extremely brief report. I invite you to upload your full statement to the website if you have not already done so. I now invite the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. Convention on Wetlands, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. COP-14 was held under the theme Wetland Action for People and Nature from 5 to 13 November 2022 in Geneva, Switzerland, with events taking place in Wuhan, China, and Geneva. The main outcomes of the COP are: a Wuhan Declaration was adopted by the high-level segment. The declaration aimed to take appropriate and urgent measures to achieve the goal and halting and reversing the loss of wetlands globally, mobilize more resources to strengthen implementation of the Convention's Forest Strategic Plan, support implementation of wetlands conservation, restoration, and wide use. The 14th meeting of the Conference of the Contracting Parties adopted 21 resolutions to strengthen parties' conservation and wide use of all wetlands. Concerning the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the COP adopted the resolution on enhancing the Convention's visibility and synergies with other multilateral environmental agreements that encourage that parties that are also parties to the CBD to enable the adequate recognition of wetlands in the goals, targets, and indicators of the future post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Urge parties to establish national collaboration mechanisms between MEA focal points to promote synergies and effectiveness of national efforts, and invite the United Nations Environment Programme to build on the Bern process and continue to strengthen cooperation and coordination among biodiversity-related conventions, contributing to effective and efficient implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework when adopted. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to reading your full statement on the website. I now invite CITES. CITES, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, some of you were with us for the 19th meeting of the Conference of the Parties to CITES, generously hosted by Panama, which wrapped up only 12 days ago. Parties, observers, and the media saw it as a landmark meeting where 365 decisions on international wildlife trade were adopted and over 500 species were listed on the CITES appendices. The decisions adopted include a decision directed to the CITES Standing Committee to explore, with the assistance of the Secretariat, options consistent with our strategic vision to strengthen cooperation, collaboration, and synergies at all relevant levels between CITES and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, taking into account the outcomes of the second consultation workshop of biodiversity-related conventions on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, or BERN 2, and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its SDGs. The Secretariat was also asked to undertake a comparative analysis to illustrate the linkages between the CITES Strategic Vision 2021 to 2030 and highlight areas of alignment with the GBF as a starting point for an assessment of how CITES can contribute to its implementation and its monitoring framework. I have provided a brief summary in my uploaded statement, which provides links to these decisions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, CITES. I now invite the International Whaling Commission. IWC, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The International Whaling Commission held its first in-person meeting in 4 years in October of this year in Portorož, Slovenia. The Commission adopted by consensus a resolution addressing the impact of marine plastic pollution through the engagement of the IWC in the UN initiative and other relevant programs, and by sharing IWC's scientific information that contributes to the development of effective measures to monitor and mitigate impacts on cetaceans. The financial challenges faced by the member countries and by the Commission due to the global pandemic and global economic decline were addressed through agreement to restore voting rights for countries who were in arrears due to the pandemic and adoption of a balanced budget under a revised budget strategy. The Commission adopted multiple reports of the Scientific and Conservation Committee, including the work to implement their many recommendations for the program of work for cetaceans, these in line with the Global Biodiversity Framework and often in collaboration with our partners in the Biodiversity Liaison Group. A brief summary may be found in the uploaded statement with a link to the meeting report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, IWC. I now invite the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm conventions. BRS conventions, you have the floor. So, do we have Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm conventions? If not, we'll move to the United Nations Convention. Sorry, I have Japan requesting the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Further enhancing the conservation of global diversity, Japan believes that the cooperation of the CBD with the ITTO is very important. In this regard, Japan would make a submission later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japan. That is noted. So I now invite the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification to speak. UNCCD, you have the floor.
Mic is not on. Yeah, you're on. Okay. Thank you, Chair. It's an honor to speak on behalf of the Secretariat of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. The UNCCD is hopeful that the CBD parties would agree to a strong and solid new global biodiversity framework. Such agreement would greatly contribute to the success of the 3 Rio Conventions. Land is the operative link between biodiversity and climate change. By focusing our actions on restoring the health and productivity of terrestrial ecosystems, we can simultaneously protect habitats, capture and store carbon, and improve the living conditions of local communities. Global commitments to restore degraded land by 2030 have reached 1 billion hectares, with almost half of this commitment pledged as land degradation neutrality targets under UNCCD. At their recent COP in Abidjan, the UNCCD parties agreed to explore complementarities within relevant multilateral environmental agreements in the implementation of sustainable land management, ecosystem-based approaches, or nature-based solutions. The Rio Conventions must deliver a coherent and integrated plan of action at all levels to finance and effectively tackle the intertwined biodiversity, land, and climate crisis. In GEF8, we welcome the fact that countries are being incentivized to move more of their programming through integrated programs that address our interconnected environmental and development challenges. In that respect, we would like to encourage all parties to align land degradation neutrality targets, nationally determined contributions, and the new biodiversity targets to maximize the impacts of nature-positive investment and significantly diminish the tremendous gap between commitment and action. Adopting new targets and agreements will only make full sense if we implement them in a coordinated manner at all levels. Thank you for your attention. At UNCCD, we stand ready to support you in promoting an enhanced collaboration for the well-being and survival of all species and the planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, UNCCD. Could I just check one last time that we do not have the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm conventions? I don't want to miss you out if you're ready to speak. All right. In that case then, colleagues, given that we have some time remaining in this session, we'll proceed to take up items that were on the agenda for tomorrow, beginning with item 6. Sorry, I do have a request from UN 385. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm addressing this meeting on behalf of the Carpathian Convention to the previous agenda item 15B on cooperation with other organizations and conventions. We welcome the strong emphasis given to the importance of improving synergies and enhancing cooperation between biodiversity-related conventions, multilateral environmental agreements, and processes at various levels, including at the regional level, that is reflected in the current draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and related draft CBD COP-15 decisions. In this respect, the Carpathian Convention, as one of the only two existing legally binding instruments for the environmental protection and sustainable development of mountain regions worldwide, it reinforces its commitment and contribution to achieving the Vision 2050 of living in harmony with nature. Carpathian Convention recognized as the regional mechanism for the implementation of the CBD and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework in the Carpathian region shall constitute an example for other international agreements and frameworks, and it underlines the importance of regional approaches in the GBF implementation. In this respect, I'm pleased to inform you about the recent adoption of the Ministerial Declaration of the Carpathian Convention on Carpathian commitments for the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework that, among others, calls for development and implementation of revised strategic action plan to the Carpathian Convention Protocol on Biodiversity that will reflect the agreed post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which shall be a comprehensive and ambitious instrument to implement transformative actions by various stakeholders in order to attain the Vision 2050 for biodiversity. Furthermore, it calls for signature and implementation of the renewed Memorandum of Cooperation between the CBD, the Alpine Convention, and the Carpathian Convention in the light of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework to enhance synergies and initiate common activities for the implementation of the new framework and guide the way for effective mountain biodiversity protection in the Alpine and Carpathian regions and beyond, sharing experiences with other mountain regions of the world.
Carpathian Convention, I apologize for interrupting. Could you please upload the rest of your statement, or upload your full statement to the website so that we can complete our work efficiently this afternoon? If that would be possible, that would be very helpful. Thank you very much. Right, colleagues, could we turn now to agenda item 16A? Or agenda item 16, sorry. Yep, so agenda item 16 is mainstreaming of biodiversity within and across sectors. This item comprises two sub-items which we will consider separately. Sub-item 16A, mainstreaming of biodiversity within and across sectors, and the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming biodiversity, and sub-item 16B, engagement with subnational governments, cities, and other local authorities to enhance implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So let us begin with sub-item 16A, and I invite the Secretariat to introduce the documents for this agenda item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In Decision 14.3, paragraph 17, the Conference of the Parties decided to establish a long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming, and in paragraphs 19b and c, requested the Executive Secretary to develop it further by working with the informal advisory group established as per paragraph 18 and with terms of reference provided in Annex 2 of that decision. The result of this work was considered by SBI 3, and the outcome of its considerations is reflected in SBI Recommendation 3/15. In paragraph 1 of that recommendation, SBI 3 invited parties, other governments, indigenous peoples and local communities, relevant stakeholders and partners to review the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming biodiversity and its action plan, and to submit their views to the Executive Secretary, and requested the Executive Secretary to make available to the COP a compilation of submissions received in order to support an in-depth, party-driven review of the long-term strategic approach to mainstreaming biodiversity with a view to its finalization. The Secretariat received 15 submissions from parties and 15 from organizations that have been posted on the website. A compilation of these submissions has been made available in 3 information documents 10, 11 and 12. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. I wish to thank the parties and organisations that provided submissions on this important agenda item. However, I note that the submissions received contain a significant number of divergent and complex proposals. I also note that by design, and since the work of the informal group, there is an overlap between the headline actions of the long-term strategic approach and the post-2020 global biodiversity targets 7, 14, 15, 16 and 18, as the approach intends to operationalise or provide further guidance on the mainstreaming related targets in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. While this creates a challenge in synchronicity and in ensuring consistency of content and language, there is general agreement that mainstreaming is at the core of the global biodiversity framework. In light of our very heavy agenda and the diversity of views, I suggest at this stage that we establish a contact group to discuss the further process on this agenda item and prepare a proposal for consideration by the working group. Given ongoing discussions on these relevant global biodiversity targets in Working Group 2, I suggest that the contact group start its work next week, and there will be further details on the contact group provided at a later stage. I see no objection. Thank you very much. So as I said, we'll announce the mandate co-chairs, date, time and place for the meeting of the contact group in due course, so please watch the monitors and online schedule. Let us now move to the next agenda item. We'll take up our final item, item 16B, engagement with subnational governments, cities and other local authorities to enhance implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. As the draft decision has been prepared by SBI, I do not plan to open the floor for further interventions at this point. I note that the decision has only a few outstanding issues. Therefore, I will undertake informal consultations on the remaining issues and prepare a conference room paper for your review and approval. I see no objection. Thank you very much. If you will just bear with us up at the podium for a few minutes, we're going to consult on the next steps and come back to you. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, we have a plan. So with your cooperation, we were able to cover all the agenda items today, including those originally scheduled for tomorrow morning. So thank you very much for that. We will break into 2 contact groups scheduled for this evening from 7:30 p.m. So, sorry, to be really clear, I don't mean we're breaking now. At 7:30 p.m. we will break into the contact groups originally scheduled. So the contact group on COP agenda item 14, mechanisms for planning, monitoring, reporting and review, and the contact group on COP agenda item 12, resource mobilisation. So please check the monitors and online schedule for the location for those meetings. I see Russian Federation asking for the floor. Russian Federation.
Спасибо.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. For the opportunity to share our serious concerns after you presented the volume and, more importantly, the format in which you plan to work within this working group. This morning, we received the document that you prepared, and this document explains in broad strokes what you envisage as the work for Working Group 1. What we read and what we have just heard is a very difficult option with quite a few limitations to those parties who wish to participate in all elements of these working groups. There's extremely large number of contact groups that have, and groups of friends of the chair that have been presented, as well as informal consultations that, it's unclear how they'll be carried out or created and with whom. We need to understand how many of these groups will be carried out at the same time, will be held in parallel to each other. As there are so many contact groups that are, and groups, friends of the chair, will also probably be created under Working Group 2. So how many of these sessions will be taking place at the same time for both working groups each day? I wish to recall that many delegations were only provided with access for 2 experts to these meetings that are being held here, but there were 3 different meetings that are taking place, if we include the plenary. And we're trying to figure out how it will be possible to take part in all of these different meetings of these different groups with so few participants. So we would have to provide all of our changes to all the CRPs, and we would find that to be the first time that we would be able to provide our views and our understandings of the various CRPs. So I want to make sure that you understand that on these CRPs we plan to make quite a few changes. And to be honest, I'm very tired to be consistently repeating the same thing. I must repeat once again that our expert, who was supposed to be here on the 2nd of December to discuss DSI, which is an extremely important topic, has yet to receive a visa. And we all know how difficult it is to carry out true negotiations online. Many countries here in this room already mentioned that they were not ready to take part in the negotiations if it was not in person. So we are extremely concerned by this situation that has developed, and we can't understand how this will work for small delegations. But we do already understand what we will be doing when we examine the CRPs. In conclusion, Chair, I would like to ask for your help. It's very difficult to follow everything that we heard today. I would ask that you create a very clear table with all of these contact groups, expected groups of friends of the chair, or these expected CRPs in various different levels, including when these CRPs are going to be examined. And vis-a-vis these CRPs, did we rightly understand that those documents that have already been considered under the subsidiary body for implementation and those that were not open for discussion here, will the text be absolutely identical to the documents and results that we received from the SBI? So what I'm asking for is a document that puts everything in place and explains exactly when everything is going to be taking place, because for now we're very confused as to the format. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Russian Federation, and thank you for your patience while we consult here on the podium. On the question of the numbers of contact groups and friends of the chair, we will be following our normal practice, which is only to schedule 2 either contact group or friends of the chair at the same time under Working Group 1, and the same process will occur under Working Group 2. The informal consultations that I talked about would be bilateral one-on-one consultations, so not requiring anything like a Friends of the Chair. They'll be, as I say, bilateral and at a time convenient to the party that I wish to that I will be consulting with. I hope that makes sense. For all CRPs, they will be reviewed paragraph by paragraph in the usual practice. So, of course, parties will have the opportunity to raise issues when they are discussed. You've asked if it would be possible to create a clear table with all of these contact groups and friends of the chair and what we're doing with the particular agenda items. I fully understand it's quite a lot to get your head around, and we can certainly create something like that for the first week. The second week remains a little unclear and depends on progress this week. And we need, of course, to remain flexible. There will be changes, but in terms of the general way we're proceeding with each agenda item, then we can certainly do that. So I hope that goes some way to addressing those concerns. Now I see that we have other requests for the floor, so the Islamic Republic of Iran, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Islamic Republic of Iran is also would like to express the same concerns that Russian Federation has raised. Our experts who are to be here to discuss the issues of the raised in the conference unfortunately have not received their visa yet. And we don't know how this party can be able to participate in all of the contact group and working groups that have been discussed here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Iran. We will also be discussing these issues tomorrow morning in the Bureau meeting to see if there are any other measures that we can take to help the situation. Democratic Republic of Congo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Colette, for the floor. The Democratic Republic of Congo would like to ask a question if we are here in a contact group.
Sorry. No, we are still in working group 1. I apologize if I confused the issue by saying that we were breaking into contact groups. We're not doing that yet. We will be doing contact groups as scheduled this evening from 7:30 p.m. So I hope that clarifies the issue. I now have Morocco requesting the floor. Morocco, you have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. My delegation has two major concerns here. The first concern is that all the work that we have done before in the working group and the views of the regions and parties were within primarily the working groups. But after the planning that you have proposed to us, several questions will be discussed in contact groups. And in the level of the contact groups, but that means that it's in English. And this is a difficulty for many of the parties to the convention, because all parties must be able to truly express their point of view regarding the documents that have been prepared. That's the first concern. But if we go beyond this, of course, we're already used to this state of affairs, unfortunately. The second concern here, Madam Chair, you noted that you were going to create some friends of the chair. Are you following what I'm saying, Madam Chair? Thank you. You had said quite simply that you were going to carry out bilateral discussions. So my delegation would like to know what criteria will be used for the chair to create these bilateral negotiations. That is what I had to say, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Morocco, and I appreciate your concerns about the challenges in operating in English. On your question on bilateral consultations, yeah, they're not bilateral negotiations. I will be, they are consultations. And generally speaking, we will be trying to identify from the previous consideration of agenda items which parties had expressed concerns about certain areas. We have good notes and good records on those, and so we will be endeavouring to ensure that we capture, we consult with those parties who we understand to be most concerned about particular issues. That's only to prepare a conference room paper that will then be subject to full review by this working group. So everybody will have an opportunity to comment on all CRPs. And that, of course, as you are fully aware in this working group, that will be in the UN languages. So interpretation will be available for the consideration of those conference room papers. So I hope that explains the situation. Now, I have the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Khalid, for the floor, and I'm very sorry to come again, but I'm a bit confused, and I would like to have some clarifications, because my delegation thinks that we cannot have double standards. It was agreed that the contact group would be held in English. If other languages are used, this should be clarified for all. We must be fair and just. The rules cannot be changed in the middle of the game. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Democratic Republic of Congo. No, we're not proposing to change the rules. In this working group, there is interpretation. In the contact groups, and this is not a contact group, in the contact groups, we will be operating in English. I hope that's clear. All right. All right. Turning back to our plan of action, we've talked about the contact groups that will be taking place from 7:30 tonight. Now, for tomorrow morning from 10 a.m., because we have completed the work that we had envisaged, what we are proposing to do is to continue the work in the form of the Friends of the Chair on the monitoring framework and the contact group on item 11 on digital sequencing information. Subject to discussion at Bureau, we may have a very short session of the contact group on item 9A on the Global Biodiversity Framework prior to the contact group on digital sequencing information. But we will provide you with information as soon as we can after the Bureau meeting. And again, I would urge you to keep an eye on the schedule, on the monitors for the scheduling of these agenda items and contact groups, and for their for the location. Now, as two of our contact groups start tonight, let me remind you of a few logistical points. These sessions cannot be recorded or shared through social media. The contact groups will work in English, and accordingly, non-papers considered at the meetings of the group are in English. As per usual practice, The outcomes of the work of the contact groups will be provided as conference room papers in all languages for review and approval by the working group. Again, as per usual practice, the statement upload is not to be used during the contact groups. All interventions are to be made in the room. This working group will meet again on Friday, 9 December at 10 a.m. to consider our first conference room papers. Until then, please check the schedule for the time and place of meetings of contact groups and Friends of the Chair, as well as for the sequence of conference room papers to be considered. And regional meetings will also be informed. Thank you. So, thank you so much for your cooperation and collaboration this afternoon, which has enabled us a little bit of extra time for the contact groups and Friends of the Chair, which I'm sure will be much appreciated. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.